Hello, everybody. It's story time. We're going to go through the history of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Now, I'm going to be calling it Artsec for the remainder of this video, although I'll switch back and forth a bit, just because Nagorno-Karabakh is kind of long. And I'm also going to apologize in advance if I get some things wrong. I did spend a lot of time trying to come up with this. I made notes, but the whole thing is so complicated and there's so many just back and forth. It's very hard to get a handle on it, but hopefully we can get the main details down. So, what is Nagorno-Karabakh, also known as the Republic of Artsakh? It is a disputed region between Armenia and Azerbaijan that is internationally recognized as being part of Azerbaijan, but until 2020 was in de facto union with Armenia and is approximately 95% plus Armenian. This is further complicated by the fact that we have, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce it, Nakhchivan, which is an autonomous part of Azerbaijan that's randomly on the other side of Armenia. And ethnic cleansing in both of these areas have meant that this part, despite not being connected to the rest of Azerbaijan, is something like 90 to 100% Azerbaijani, and this area is 95% Armenian. Now, this is not even a recent development. We can blame the Soviet Union for this nonsense. This was part of, this was like this beforehand. I can't recall if this was an autonomous part of Armenia or if this was just part of Azerbaijan and it just wasn't geographically contiguous. I know with Nagorno-Karabakh, it was always part of the Azerbaijani Socialist Republic. It's just that it was an autonomous part of the autonomous republic that was Armenian majority, but not part of the Armenian Socialist Republic. We're just blowing minds here. That's about as best as I can say it. Basically, the issue is, as with a lot of places in the Soviet Union, we saw this with Crimea. When the country collapsed, it was split apart along administrative lines. The administrative lines weren't necessarily based on the exact areas where different cultures or peoples or religions or any of that stuff was. So you'll have Russian majority areas that got annexed to Georgia or various Central Asian states or Moldova or stuff like that, which, if given the choice, would have remained part of Russia, but the independence was based upon what the de jure borders were of the area. Crimea, for instance, was part of Russia until Khrushchev because it was part of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. When it declared independence, it became part of Ukraine, even if the people there might not have wanted to leave the successor state to the Soviet Union. It's all very complicated. Basically, the Soviet Union collapsed. There's all these random minorities spread out all over the places, and all of these tiny post-Soviet states are fighting each other over the scraps, I think is one way to put it. So, what is Armenia? Let's talk a bit about Armenia before we get into any more of this. So, Armenia is a Indo-European speaking, or rather the Armenians are an Indo-European speaking people who come from the southern Caucasus or eastern Anatolia. Their range used to be a lot further west, but some stuff happened with the Turks that we aren't allowed to talk about, and they don't really live there anymore. But the Armenians were the first people on Earth to adopt Christianity. I think it was in like 311 or something like that. So they are the longest Christianized nation in the world, although Armenia is periodically independent, but they were the first national government to embrace Christianity. Now let's go a bit about what kind of happened after that. So as we all know, the Western Roman Empire collapsed. The majority of it got swallowed up by the Ottoman Empire, who took all of its Middle Eastern, Egyptian, and Balkan territories, all of which were annexed and incorporated into provinces of the Ottoman Empire. Now, the Ottomans did not attempt to, or at least totally, to Islamize all of the areas that they took over. Part of this is just because if you keep Dhimmi, then you can keep charging them jizya, and they can pay extra tax dollars to you. And so Muslim subjects don't have to pay as much taxes. And if you convert your subjects to Islam, then they aren't paying the extra taxes anymore. So, in a lot of cases, empires are okay with having a substantial non Muslim population, as it's a good source of tax revenue. And hopefully, it helps to give a sense of solidarity to the Muslim portions of it. So, when Russia became an empire, it reformed under the Romanovs from the Tsardom of Muscovy. The Russian emperors took the claim to being the Third Rome because they were this large Orthodox Christian state. The Romanovs claimed some descent from some of the Eastern Roman emperors, and they've viewed themselves as the protectors of Eastern Christendom, kind of the way that the Holy Roman Empire or Spain or France was seen as the protector of Western Christendom, that is Catholicism. So Russia, and this is partially religious, partially ideological, partially cynical, committed itself to freeing all the various Christian peoples that were part of the Ottoman Empire. This was also done with Austro-Hungary at the same time. But Russia fought a large number of wars over the span of several centuries, in which more and more territories were either annexed into Russia and became part of another Christian country, or obtained their independence. Notably, some countries that Russia helped obtain their independence include Bulgaria, Greece, Serbia. In these conflicts, Russia either directly intervened to free them, or they provided weapons and volunteers, or they fought on another front, or something like that. And there is, to this day, from my understanding, in a lot of places, an enduring sort of affection among the local populations towards Russia, as they view them as their savior, the people who came in and kicked out the Ottomans and restored their national independence and allowed them to live in a Christian state again. Now, Armenia was one such area. Although Armenia has historically been held by both Turkey or the Ottoman Empire and Iran, and in a series of wars against both of them, Russia was able to take all of eastern and western Armenia, although large portions of Armenian populated areas remained under the control of the Ottomans. The modern Armenia we see here today is, I believe, this area was taken from Persia, and this area was taken from Turkey. Interestingly, from my understanding, Armenia has traditionally had good relations with Iran, obviously bad relations with Turkey, but I think because there's kind of a rivalry between Iran and Turkey, it's a bit of an enemy of the enemy, is my friend sort of thing going on. So, in the early 1800s, Russia succeeded in conquering Armenia from both Iran and Turkey. And immediately afterwards, Russia began to encourage a returning of Armenians from the Armenian diaspora, Armenians from Turkey, from Iran, from other countries to move there. The region, from my understanding, had only been about 50% Armenian, or slightly less than 50% of Armenian, at the time the Russians conquered it. But because of their promotion of Armenian culture, their resettlement of Armenians in the area, the region quickly became majority Armenian and eventually supermajority Armenian. So, Armenian society enjoyed a lot of economic and social and religious development once Russia took over. They were able to practice their faith again. While Armenia is not an Eastern Orthodox, it is an Oriental Orthodox church. For some of the Tsars, at least, that was regarded as being close enough. And so they were granted a lot of additional privileges and rights and funding and stuff that they didn't have under the Ottomans. The Russians also sponsored Armenian language schools, libraries, universities, and Armenian papers. The Armenians almost immediately became something of what's known as a middleman minority. If you've read Thomas Sowell's work, this is a minority who has a lot of connections, both at home and abroad, who's good at moving goods from one place to another, who's involved with business and mercantilism and stuff like that. Some other examples would be the Igbo, the Maronites, obviously the Jews, and just any other minority you can think of that's overrepresented among business people and international traders. That being said, a majority of Armenia, like much of the Russian Empire, remained impoverished farmland, but it had definitely come a long way. Now, towards the end of the Russian Empire, the later czars undertook radical Russification programs in which they actively started to suppress the local identities, forced everyone to use Russian as their main language, and were starting to subject the Armenian Orthodox Church to more and more control by the Moscow one. This was reversed once again prior to World War One, when Russia, because Russia had briefly supported Turkey's, the Ottomans' territorial integrity because they didn't want a collapse, a failed state on their border. But then they changed their mind again and they reconciled with Armenia prior to World War One. After World War One, it was thought that large portions of eastern Turkey would be given to Armenia. You had the whole plan for the partition of Turkey, which unfortunately never happened. Ataturk kicked everybody out, and we have the modern Republic of Turkey as a result of that war. Now, the Soviet Caucasus is like a whole other thing. It went through, because it was one of the first, it's gone through so many revolutions and changes and stuff. Basically, what to know is Nagorno-Karabakh, or Artsakh, was part of Azerbaijan, but it was a special autonomous part of the Azerbaijani Soviet Socialist Republic because it was majority Armenian. Today, after all the ethnic cleansing that's gone on there, it's about 95% Armenian. Actually, here we go. I managed to find a map from the Soviet era. So as you can see here, this was part of this autonomous Soviet Republic that was part of Azerbaijan. Oh no, that's what that stands for. Sorry, ASSR. I'm stupid. But we have the Armenian Soviet Socialist Republic, and then we also have Nagorno-Karabakh, or Artsakh, over here that is an autonomous part of it. We can also see where some of these other issues came from, where South Ossetia had a special status, as did Abkhazia. Like I said, the whole thing is quite confusing. So we have the breakup of the Soviet Union when all these areas become independent. And almost immediately, we have a war that goes on between Azerbaijan and Armenia over where is the border going to be. Is the border going to be? Is it going to be here? What the Soviet lines were? Is Azerbaijan going to take this little part here and get a land bridge over to the rest of it? Is Nagorno-Karabakh going to be part of Armenia? Is it going to be part of Azerbaijan? Is it going to be a special status region? Interestingly, originally Azerbaijan was willing to have it as an autonomous special status region, but they've gone back on that, and now it's just going to be directly incorporated, should they succeed in taking the rest of it. So we had a 6-year-long slugfest between the two sides. Both sides were fairly even for a lot of the conflict. From what I was looking up, apparently the Armenians had more military experience, as they had more of the Armenians had served in combat roles in the Soviet army, whereas the Azerbaijanis were more in logistics, and so they had a slight edge in terms of trained manpower. Both had similar levels of equipment. However, during the course of this massive slugfest, towards the end of it, Armenia received billions of dollars in military assistance from Russia. Russia's position in the Caucasus is almost impossible to describe. Generally speaking, Russia's played both sides, but they've generally come out on the side of Armenia when push comes to shove. And with their aid, Armenia was able to win the first war and was able to occupy not just Nagorno-Karabakh or Artsakh, but also the area surrounding it. So yeah, we have Artsakh there, and then as you can see, Armenia cleaned up some of the border gore and occupied the entire area around it. The parts that were the areas that were part of neither. And that was how the conflict was basically for the next couple of decades. We had a couple low-intensity conflicts that went on back and forth over time. I think during the one of the conflicts, they were able to Azerbaijan took a little bit of territory, but by and large, things were just kind of puttering along. That was until the Velvet Revolution. So something to say because I'm going to be drawing probably excessively direct comparisons with Ukraine here. The problem with looking at politics in Armenia, as in a lot of these post-Soviet states, is a lot of these states feel like mob movies. And while there is definitely an ideological component where some people are conservative, some people are liberal, some people are pro-Russia, some people are anti-Russia. A lot of it is also who gets to be the kleptocrat in power to steal stuff, and they will use whatever particular ideological or geopolitical position they think will get them in the position to steal money. All of these places are extremely corrupt. That's something you saw all the time in Ukraine. You can like there's the ideology part and the geopolitics matter, but a lot of it is who's on whose side really depends on who thinks they can get the most money out of a particular situation. Or sorry, there are multiple Velvet Revolutions. I've normally heard of the Armenian Revolution referred to as the Velvet Revolution, but it also applies to the fall of communism in Czechoslovakia. So Armenia had been governed by how do you pronounce this? Sirs Sargsyan, who I'm not entirely sure. My understanding, and once again, this is take this with a massive salt mine, is they were generally speaking conservative pro-Russia. So he was part of the Republican Party, which has the coolest logo I think of any political party I've ever seen, which governed Armenia for much of the 2000s and late 90s, and was a national conservative party whose idea was behind a synthesis of Armenian ethno-nationalism with Orthodox Christianity. Although other people say it was just a collection of kleptocrats that used nationalistic rhetoric in order to get votes from a disillusioned public. I'll let you be the guy. But generally speaking, they were a pro-Russian, conservative Armenian nationalist party. And they had been in power for quite a period of time, from 1999 to 2018. However, something happened in 2008. There was a bunch of spontaneous protests. A certain U.S. organization called the National Endowment for Democracy got involved. There was a bunch of stuff on social media. A whole bunch of NGOs entered into the fray. So I think previously he had said that Sirs said that he was not going to run for re-election and there was term limits. However, they removed term limits from the Constitution so he could run from office again. But basically, the protesters were like, look, the duly elected government of Armenia can't make these decisions itself. It can't make amendments to the Constitution. The parliament doesn't have the right to pick who they want to be the prime minister. He has to resign. We're going to riot and protest until he resigns. And so they did. You just had, like I said, spontaneous protests all across the country involving NGOs, involving the National Endowment of Democracy, demanding the prime minister to resign. And this is where we enter the protagonist or antagonist of this whole drama, Nikol Pashinyan. I'm just going to call him Pashinyan because I think that is what how he's normally referred to. So Pashinyan came onto the scene, and he quickly became the leader of the protests, and he demanded that the prime minister step down, that he not seek re-election. So, to my understanding, Pashinyan decided that he was the head of the anti-government movement. He's like, look, I speak on behalf of all of the protesters. They all support me. You got to make me prime minister. So basically, they just kept protesting and they started to shut down the country's economy. And Pashinyan said, unless you make me prime minister, not even have a new election, just make me prime minister, then I'm going to keep this rioting going. Eventually, the ruling party gave in and made him prime minister. Interestingly, when they had the election for who would be the next prime minister, he was the only candidate whose name was put forward. So the leader of the Democratic opposition won with. So yeah, so Pashinyan had become prime minister. So previously, his party had received a total of, I think it was like, yeah, received 9% of the vote. So he got 9% of the vote in the previous election. Uh, he came to power after spontaneous nationwide protests that might have had NGOs involved. And then in the next election, his party somehow won a supermajority. Imagine that. That is a shocker right there. Look, I'm not going to allege anything, but I'm going to allege something. So if we look at the 2017 presidential election, let's see here. Now, it's alleged, which there's not, because electoral fraud has never taken place in the history of the world, but there's alleged that there was fraud in that election. However, that same fraudulent electoral machine seems to have helped Pashinyan out because somehow his party got 70% of the vote. It went from 7 to 70% of the vote, and the Republican Party fell to like 4% of the vote. It's funny how that kind of stuff happens. And so he was able to take absolute power. The Pashinyan's party is a neoliberal, pro-West party, although it should be said it's not necessarily super anti-Russia, at least on the surface, because Russia is so popular in Armenia, you can't really be openly anti-Russian. Then we had the subsequent election, which once again, his party won the election by quite a large mark. Oh no, okay, there's let's see here, civil contract. Yep, they won another majority. Funny how that seems to have happened. And I believe that the pro-Russian side got about a third of the vote. But I mean, if we look at this, his party got a super majority, and then the opposition parties barely got anything. So that was that. Let's see here. Is it stating that what was their ethics in video game journalism in this election? So yeah, there was complaints that stuff happened in the 2018 election, and complaints that stuff happened in the 2021 election. But you know how it is with pro-Russia crowd; they're always claiming that there's electoral fraud. So I'm sure it was completely legitimate. Pashinyan is a true lover of democracy. So what wound up happening during this was the second Nagorno-Karabakh War of 2020. This is during Pashinyan's time as prime minister. So we're going to start heading into speculation. So obviously, what I think, and if it hasn't been implied strong enough, is that Pashinyan was brought to power largely by a colored revolution, which they even call it a colored revolution, by Western NGOs and intelligence services as a way to try to sever Russia's control of Armenia. Because Armenia, as I've said, is very pro-Russia. They see Russia as being their protector, as the only one who can ensure their security and safety. Armenia is not part of the EU, it's part of the Eurasian Union. And there was discussions at some point about expanding it so that Armenia would enter the Union state with Russia and Belarus. So, Azerbaijan has been prepping up for a war for a lengthy period of time. They've been putting their guys into position. Everyone was pretty sure that a war was about to happen. However, suspiciously, or perhaps foolishly, Pashinyan was just like, it's okay, guys. It's okay, don't worry about it. It's not going to be a big deal. There's not going to be a war. We don't need to mobilize the army. We don't need to get We don't need to get better. We don't need to get everything in line. Let me see here, because they had some good stuff here. Let's see here. Turkey and Russia. So the war broke out. Armenia was in no way ready. They didn't have the equipment. They didn't have their guys in position. They got steamrolled by Azerbaijan, and they lost an immense amount of territory. Now, let me see if I can find the political crisis. So let's see here. I'm just trying to find it. Give me a sec. Okay, so here we go. This is what some people said about it. Criticized Pashinyan's government for doing nothing to prepare for the war, despite it being known Azerbaijan troops had been gathering at the border for several months before the attack. Not for minimal commitment to the war effort. For over a month after the war started, they did not fully mobilize. They didn't spend adequate amounts of money on the military. So a lot of people think that Pashinyan, through this conflict, didn't really attempt to put up any real fight or go as hard as they could have, and that maybe the outcome would have been different had he actually tried or if the previous government had been in power. And this triggered the Armenian political crisis, wherein a massive number of people took to the streets and said that Pashinyan has to resign, that he had lost the mandate of heaven, that nobody liked him. There was both pro-Russia and pro-Americans who wanted him to step down. The Armenian Orthodox Church told him to step down. The president did. The head of all kinds of people asked him to step down, and then the army's like, "Dude, you might want to step down." And then Pashinyan's like, "No, it's a coup. It's a coup, guys. It's a coup. It's there's no desire for me to step down. So what I'm going to do instead of step down is we're going to hold snap elections, which somehow my party is going to win." Wait a minute. Membership 5,000? So wait a minute. His party has a super majority in a country of 3 million people, and there's 5,000 members. That is not suspicious at all. But they succeeded in winning a supermajority, despite there being widespread protests all throughout the country, and he remained in power. Now, since then, this whole thing, change of power. What is this? Director of urban base, central change of power due to the rather small scale of the protests and the unpopularity of the opposition. Oh, it's only small scale protests when the I don't know when the pro Russia people do it. Although some of the pro US people were also protesting over this. I don't know. Like I said, this whole thing is really confusing. But so he succeeded in holding on to power. Now to look at how bad the actual war went. Okay, so this is a little hard to see. So that is Artsakh, right there. The green is territory that Armenia occupied. Actually, green and that is both territory that Armenia occupied during the 1994 war. It took all this territory. It got a fairly kind of contiguous group of land out of it. Now, Azerbaijan was not only able to grab back all the territory it lost, but also a substantial amount of Artsakh. As you can see, they grabbed some territory there. That's where the original boundary line was. That all got conquered and recaptured. So Armenia basically lost all of their territorial gains. Artsakh became like much smaller than it used to be, and the Armenian population in these areas basically got kicked out or fled towards the rest of Armenia. Now, the Azerbaijani government has also come up with this idea of Greater Azerbaijan, or or Western Azerbaijan, which is something that's come up, which is that Armenia is actually Western Azerbaijan, and it needs to be annexed. The Armenian people expelled from the area once again, and that whole area brought under control. So yeah, they lost all this territory. They're hanging on. There is a tiny corridor, the Lechen corridor here, that connects Artesk with the rest of Armenia, and it is sole lifeline because everything else is being blockaded. Russian peacekeepers control this. However, Azerbaijan, and one of the greatest trolls in history, got a massive number of civil servants and soldiers to pretend to be environmental protesters and shut down the Lechen corridor and some of the other stuff. Artsakh has been completely blockaded since the end of the previous war, more or less, or not the previous war, but for the last little while. Disguised military personnel, civil servants, and members of pro-government NGOs and youth organizations blockaded it, claiming for it to be a environmental concern. So the Armenians in Artsakh are trapped inside of there. They don't have food. They don't have water. The whole thing is just a complete and total disaster. Lots of people are fleeing away from it. And there's recently been more border clashes. And today this has escalated into what appears to be at least an all-out invasion by our Azerbaijan of the territory of Artsakh. Given the general disinterest of the current government, Russia being distracted with other stuff, and pretty much everything else, it does seem to me that Azerbaijan is probably going to overwhelm this area in a matter of days and take it. The question is whether or not they're going to stop there and whether they're going to keep pushing and try to get their idea of the whole Azerbaijan or greater Azerbaijan, or at least take a corridor down here so that they can connect the rest of their territory. That being said, they may even decide to make the border war worse and take some of the territory in that area and split Armenia in half. Wouldn't that be fun? Then we'd have even more incoherency. So, what is the takeaway? What the fuck caused all of this? So, the theory I've heard is that Pashinyan wants this issue resolved, and he's willing to sacrifice the entire area to do it. That he's deliberately throwing the war. He's deliberately provoking Azerbaijan. He's deliberately not trying to resolve anything so that Azerbaijan can invade. This territorial dispute is gone. He can blame Russia for the whole thing as a pretext for severing relations with Russia because Russia didn't intervene to save them. And then they're going to join NATO and the EU. And that is the theories I've heard as to what the 4D chess plan is. I don't know. That seems very plausible given how poorly they performed. It could honestly just simply be that Azerbaijan is a much larger country with a much bigger economy. Now, as to why Russia didn't get involved previously, I think Russia has guaranteed the territorial integrity of Armenia proper, but not of Artsakh or Nagorno-Karabakh. So hopefully I explained that somewhat. I'm sorry if I got some details wrong. This thing is super confusing. I spent the better part of the day trying to figure this out instead of working at my job. So God bless everybody. Pray for Armenia. Hopefully they will emerge from this in one piece, but it's not looking good.